Now, look, also, meanwhile, on another topic, it turns out that YouTube was, in fact, censoring content creators, and they were doing it under pressure from the Biden administration. I could have told you that because, of course, Crossroads is censored. And they were also doing this under pressure from the Biden administration. That's the big reveal on this. It turns out they were being pressured by the former administration to censor content that they didn't like. And they were doing it pretty broadly. It wasn't just YouTube. It was Twitter, now known as X. It was Facebook. It was Google. And yes, it was YouTube. Now, this actually came out on the YouTube side during a congressional subpoena, and Google is now saying it's going to roll back some of this censorship. Now, look, we'll see how broad they roll it back. They say they're going to restore channels that were booted off the platform for political reasons. I'd briefly add to that censorship is a lot more than just people who are kicked off. It's people demonetized and everything else. Hopefully they end all censorship. We'll see how far it goes. Representative Jim Jordan said this. He's, of course, chairman of the House Judiciary Committee. He said senior Biden administration officials, including White House officials, conducted repeated and sustained outreach to Alphabet, the company behind Google and YouTube, of course. And it said it pressed the company regards certain user-generated content related to the COVID-19 pandemic that did not violate its policies. And remember what I did at the beginning of all this? Well, I did the big documentary tracing the origins of the Wuhan coronavirus, now known as COVID-19. And that was the start of it all. And note that while the company continued to develop and enforce its policies independently, Biden administration officials continued to press the company to remove non-violative user-generated content, videos and content people were creating on a platform basically dedicated to that. And note that as online platforms, including Alphabet, grappled with these decisions, the administration's officials, including President Biden, created a political atmosphere that sought to influence the actions of platforms based on their concerns regarding misinformation, false information. And to be fair, look, President Donald Trump is also now saying that misinformation is like a threat and so on. Because misinformation related to his policies is causing people to go out and shoot people and kill people. So misinformation is a concern. The problem is, how do you decide who's telling the truth and who isn't, right? Now, they note this as well, though. The company, again, Alphabet or YouTube, the company terminated channels for repeatedly violating its community guidelines on elections, integrity, content through 2023, and COVID-19 content through 2024. A fancy way of saying, if you were talking about election fraud, if you were talking about all the things Trump was talking about, which most conservatives were, you were probably censored, you were probably affected in some way. And anybody saying anything about COVID-19 through 2024, basically the 2024 elections, and Donald Trump coming into office, anybody talking about that was probably also impacted if you did anything that questioned the prevailing narratives. They note that, quote, today, YouTube's community guidelines allow for a wide range of content regarding COVID-19 and elections integrity. You can talk about some, but not all. They note that reflecting the company's commitment to, quote unquote, free expression, laugh out loud. YouTube will provide an opportunity for all creators to rejoin the platform if the company terminated their channels for repeated violations of COVID-19 and elections integrity policies that are no longer in effect. I would raise some concerns with this personally. Because look, they're saying they're going to restore some channels that were kicked off the platform that repeatedly violated these, standards on election integrity and so on. But they say they're only going to restore the ones that violated policies that are no longer in effect. Meaning, there are still some policies in effect, and some of them, again, we don't really even know the full extent of them. I can say with Epoch Times, they censored all of our channels simultaneously, and they never even told us the reason. They said one of our channels violated their content policies, and because one of our channels, they wouldn't tell us which one. They wouldn't tell us what it violated. Because one of them violated it, they censored all of our channels. That's what they did to us. And so when they don't even tell you why they're doing it, they don't tell you what the policy that was violated was, how do you do anything about it? That's what they've been doing. Now, look, we'll see how far they go with actually ending censorship. But I will add, censorship on YouTube goes beyond just cases of them kicking content creators off the platform. Like, I'm still here, but I'm demonetized. I am still here, but my channel is frozen. They've been freezing channels. They've been not sending notifications to some channels. A lot of people believe that they've even been like deleting followers. There are people even telling a lot of content creators, hey, I was subscribed. Somehow I've been automatically unsubscribed. They're, of course, making it so people can't make a profit. And there's a lot of problems like this. Now, one issue you have with that type of censorship, and it is censorship because that was a big narrative in the mainstream media. The mainstream media back in 2020 and so on was saying, look, it's not censorship. It's a private company. A private company can do whatever it wants. It is censorship if the federal government is doing it. I would actually add to this that there's a bit of a gray area here. It's censorship either way. The question is it censorship that violates the First Amendment? Violations of the First Amendment would be the government doing it. A private company, you can deny service to who you want. If a guy walks into your restaurant and he's like waving, like something around and acting crazy, you have the right to kick him out. He doesn't have his full right of free speech, standing, yelling, standing on a table and yelling in your restaurant. Doesn't have that right. But the government cannot just kick somebody out. Well, maybe if they're standing on a table, they can kick them out if they're like violent or something. Free speech is protected against federal or government in general interference. It's not protected in like a business or something like that for the most part. And so the problem you've had for a long time is censorship on these platforms, YouTube, X, Facebook, Google, the internet in general, as we're now running into with like foreign censorship. Is that illegal, right? Can you censor that? And the big argument is this: well, is censorship still is it illegal if the government suggests you should do it? And the problem he had with the way the Biden administration was doing this type of censorship is they weren't ordering companies to do it, but they were pressuring them, suggesting they might punish them, and then suggesting that they remove stuff or like flagging content for them. A lot of the platforms said that they censored content because they were quote unquote pressured. And pressured is different from forced. That's the kind of language issue here. Pressured is different from forced. And so does government pressure to censor equate a violation of the First Amendment? That's the legal question that's going to have to be resolved with this. Now, a lot of Democrats have pointed out, well, hey, isn't Donald Trump kind of doing the same thing? That's going to be a legitimate debate, right? One problem you have right now, FCC Chair Brendan Carr is talking about pulling the broadcast rights of several mainstream media because they've been posting, misinformation, false information, that they're fanning the flames of far-left radicalism. They're spreading false stories literally all the time. They've been doing it since 2015, 2016. The Trump-Russia fake narrative, the hoaxes they've dealt with the whole time, and of course the misrepresentation of people, framing them as Nazis and terrorists and everything else, which is being used to justify violence against them. One of the big, issues with this is late-night TV host Jimmy Kimmel. He briefly had his show put on hold because he made false statements saying the guy who killed Charlie Kirk, at least accused of killing him, was a MAGA supporter. He was not. He was, it seems to be, someone interested in furry pornography and was dating a trans guy and was very, very far left, according to everybody who was close to him. His family was MAGA. His family was Trump supporters, but he flipped somehow, it seems, after he went to college. Now, many people criticized the deplatforming, though, of Jimmy Kimmel as censorship. You can't kick a guy off because he gets something wrong, right? That's just one show, but I will note this. There were thousands, maybe more, hosts on YouTube that got kicked off or censored in many other ways. And while people are making a fuss over, hey, Jimmy Kimmel got canceled, and look, to be honest, it is censorship, right? It is censorship. The question is, was it his personal opinion, Or was it a scripted thing being run by a giant corporation being influenced by political interests? That's the question, right? And also that's the question on whether that guy's independent or not. What is the degree of your independence? Are you acting as effectively a voice box for like one political system where you're funding them, you're promoting them, you're acting as basically like the campaign sidekick or something like that? Or are you independent where you legitimately have your own opinions? Is it still free speech if it's a massive institution directly tied in with the, effectively like campaigning for a political ideology? Like, how do you draw the line with that? That's the problem you have with a lot of those networks. And how does that compare to like independent YouTubers, many of whom had more views daily than Jimmy Kimmel does, by the way? How do you compare that, right? One issue we're having is that the number of content creators kicked off platforms, and not just YouTube, but a lot of them, most of them were the conservative ones. And when you have basically the entire conservative base facing some degree of censorship, demonetization, the restrictions on reach, that is a massive form of political censorship in this country that basically took away the voice of everybody who doesn't agree with one side of the aisle, who has one political opinion. And then when you go out to college campuses and try to engage people directly, they kill you for it. How do you have free speech if you risk getting murdered? How do you have free speech if you risk being able to not make a living? How do you have free speech if you show your face, they dox you, list your home address, and then go after you and your family? How do you have free speech? The problem we've had in this country is that all of these platforms, all of these systems, all of the political rhetoric, all of the advocacy for violence, all of the labeling has effectively gone after one side of the political aisle, and they're killing them, they're censoring them, they're targeting them, they're ruining their lives. And what do you do about that? Is it censorship then if the president says, hey, this needs to stop? Is it censorship then if the president says, look, you've been censoring, attacking, demonetizing, targeting us, and it needs to stop? Is that censorship? Or is it like going after the systems of censorship, political control, and effectively controlling every voice box of every major platform? How do you deal with that? That's where we're at with this. And I would say also the big problem is we got to find out what to do now with YouTube censorship, because again, I will note the company's saying they're going to restore deleted channels. Censorship on YouTube is a lot more than just deleted channels. I'm speaking as as an aggrieved party here, because Crossroads has been demonetized for over 4 years now, and we were deeply impacted by these censorship policies. I want to jump into some other topics. In other news also, the long-awaited study on the causes of autism has now been released. The Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, declared that acetaminophen, which is in Tylenol, right? It's one of the main things in Tylenol. It can cause autism in children if their mothers take it often when they're pregnant. So in other words, it's like you take it once and your kid has autism. You got to kind of take it a lot. Now, this is the official notice from the FDA commissioner. This is Martin Makey. He said in recent years, evidence has accumulated suggesting that the use of acetaminophen by pregnant women may be associated with an increased risk of neurological conditions such as autism and ADHD in children. It's that some studies have described that the risk may be most pronounced when acetaminophen is taken chronically throughout pregnancy to childbirth. The woman takes it pretty often. Maybe you take it every night, or I don't know, maybe once a week. I don't know how often, but pretty often, like you take it one time. They add that these concerns may be magnified by the fact that a very young child's liver may still be developing, and thus the child's ability to metabolize the drug may be limited. To be clear, while an association between acetaminophen and autism has been described in many studies, which we'll get into, it says a causal relationship has not been established, and there are contradictory studies in the scientific literature. I'll briefly note that one problem you have in scientific literature is that you often have special interest among the doctors and scientists themselves. Like the guy works for like the company or something like that. There's a lot of that going on. Scientific literature in general, but especially with medicine, is often tainted by special interest, and often tainted as well by the fact that some medical journals just won't publish information if it goes too hard against like the established narrative. It's a big problem with these industries, and they are industries. They add here, though, as well, quote, "The association is an ongoing area of scientific debate, and clinicians should be aware of the issue in their clinical decision-making, especially given that most short-term fevers in pregnant women and young children do not require medication." You probably don't need to be taking Tylenol. And in America, too, a lot of people treat Tylenol as like not a major medication to take. It's kind of like the just whatever medication. It does have an effect, apparently. Now, they say this as well: in the spirit of patient safety and prudent medicine, clinicians should consider minimizing the use of acetaminophen during pregnancy for routine low-grade fevers. This consideration should also be balanced with the fact that acetaminophen is the safest over-the-counter alternative in pregnancy among all these, treatments for this. They note that aspirin and ibuprofen have well-documented adverse impacts on the fetus. So it is known that it does affect your infant while you're pregnant. Now, Epoch also did some follow-up reporting on this. They said the Food and Drug Administration, the FDA, notified doctors on September 22nd that using acetaminophen during pregnancy, quote, may be associated, not is associated, but may be associated with an increased risk of neurological conditions. Now, let's say a spokesperson for Kenvue, parent company of Tylenol's manufacturer, told the Epoch Times in an email, quote, "We believe independent sound science clearly shows that taking acetaminophen does not cause autism." This is the company, right? This is the company that does it. They say, "We strongly disagree with any suggestion otherwise and are deeply concerned with the health risk this poses for expecting mothers." Like on the side of the company that's behind Tylenol, they are like the safest over-the-counter drug for this type of stuff. The problem you're going to have with that is basically if a mother has a headache or something like that, you got to deal with it basically if you can't take this stuff. Now, notes as well that multiple studies have found that acetaminophen during pregnancy can, in fact, increase the risk of autism, a disorder marked by symptoms such as difficulty communicating, difficulty processing change, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, ADHD, including a review of 46 prior studies published in August. In other words, there is, in fact, a lot of science saying, yeah, this stuff causes autism in kids if you're taking it while you're pregnant. And notes as well that some lawsuits have been filed alleging the retailers failed to warn people that Tylenol or generic versions of the drug could cause autism or ADHD. Remember why that's important, right? The Trump administration just made it so that advertising for like drugs and pharmaceuticals, if they're advertising on TV or whatever else, they have to show all of the adverse effects, all the side effects. They show you quite a few, and they're oftentimes pretty crazy, right? Like may cause suicidal ideation, may cause like homicidal ideation. Like how does a drug cause that? They have to start telling you everything these drugs do. And even that stuff that we regard generally as safe has side effects, including Tylenol. And so they're noting that maybe there needs to be more warnings on this. The timing of this is important because, people weren't warned about that. There is, in fact, scientific studies showing, in fact, that Tylenol can cause this. Now, notes as well, a federal judge in 2023 handling a number of those suits determined that people proposed as expert witnesses by plaintiffs had not provided scientific evidence behind the claims and barred the people from testifying. They couldn't even testify. And based on that order, the judge dismissed the case. So, again, the Tylenol company, they're noting that basically there's not strong enough evidence to suggest that this is the case. The Trump side is saying, well, there is scientific evidence. It's true that, in terms of like being taken before a court, it was tossed out by the judge or people weren't allowed to testify. But if people are not allowed to testify, how do you have an actual judgment? That's the question. We're going to have to see what comes out from this in terms of the causes of autism. This is probably the beginning of this, very far from the end. President Trump and HHS Secretary RFK Jr., they've been working pretty broadly to expose problems with the pharmaceutical industry. This includes problems with media and advertising. This includes problems of, even scientific studies being tainted by special interest. It includes the kind of two-way street between the, FDA and government branches that regulate this stuff and people working in the companies, because they tend to go back and forth. There's a lot of special interest, there's a lot of overlap, and there's a lot of concern that special interest and overlap is tainting the willingness to state the truth, that we're not being told the truth because there's special interest. That said, thank you so much for being here. We're back on again tomorrow, and I'll see you then. So as always, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free.